Okay, so my presentation is going to be on the nesting behavior in a population of western pond turtles. So to dive right in for background information, their historical range is from southern British Columbia, Canada, down to Baja California, Mexico, but their conservation status varies within the United States. They are endangered in Washington, threatened in Oregon, and then a species of special concern in California, but they are actively under review to become federally listed. They are California's only native freshwater turtle, and they're actually split into two subspecies. You have the northwestern pond turtle and the southwestern pond turtle, and they face a variety of threats, including habitat fragmentation and urbanization, invasive species such as your red-eared sliders and your bullfrogs, and then climate change that leads to droughts and mass die-outs and reduced reproduction, which has been seen and documented in California. One thing that I always like to add in is that western pond turtles were actually once a part of the food trade. So it was estimated that 524,100 western pond turtles were harvested for turtle soup for restaurants in San Francisco. Oh, oh, there we go. Between the years 1863 and 1931, and these are just the numbers that were reported, so it's hard to fathom the amount of western pond turtles that were harvested that went unreported. And with them being a long-lived species that reproduce relatively slowly, these numbers are devastating and can be hard to overcome. But on to a more positive note, our field site is in Livermore, California. It is a 5,000-acre cattle ranch with spring-fed perennial stock ponds. It's actually owned by Zone 7, the water agency, but it's leased by Paul Banky, the rancher. And due to the location of the field site, we fall into the Bay Area where the two subspecies actually meet. So we have northwestern pond turtles with hybrid southwestern pond turtles, and there have been no prior studies at this field site, so we're actually conducting a lot of studies all at the same time. So we're doing disease and genetics, habitat use using solar-powered GPS units, and then of course our nesting project. I do want to talk a little bit about our nesting project, which aims to track turtles to better understand their movements, and then the main portion of my talk will be able to identify nesting female locations. But both goals are to use new data to help make informed conservation decisions. So for our GPS trackers, we have 5 males with trackers at the Patterson Ranch. In total, we have about 20 with GPS transmitters because it's a part of a larger project with East Bay Regional Parks, SWAIM, and the ACRCD. But with our GPS trackers, we're actually able to check their location whenever we want by looking at an app on our phone. And to no one's surprise, this is a lot of what we saw. So this is one male turtle's movement across almost an entire year. He never really left the pond, maybe except to bask on the edges a little bit. Shocking, right? Even US Fish and Wildlife says that males will typically stay in situ, especially when females are leaving to nest. And that kind of made us question if we made the right choice by buying expensive transmitters. But we were actually able to document some cool extremes. For example, male ABJ, who traveled an estimated 1.71 kilometers. So experts say that when a turtle leaves a pond, the max distance is 500 meters, and that when they leave a pond, they prefer in-water movement, such as following drainages. However, male ABJ does not follow this framework. In fact, when leaving the pond, he left the creek that had water in it in order to scale a hill that was over 100 meters in elevation. I know this because Farley and I actually hiked it together. It was not easy. He went overland, through grassland, and oak forest, and down a ravine. Unfortunately, we lost coverage of his GPS unit, but the story doesn't end here. He was later found by campers at the same exact campground that we stay at during our nesting season. So he left the creek, went uphill through a ravine, through what we assume the reservoir, up another creek, and then entered a brand new watershed. So it's estimated he traveled 6.53 kilometers, which breaks the record for the turtle that traveled 5 kilometers in Washington. But what was great about this is that male ABJ was just one of a few turtles with their GPS transmitters that broke the quote-unquote standard behavior that you read about of western pond turtles in literature. So what we're learning is that turtle movement is complicated, but GPS is allowing us to see unique behaviors that would otherwise go unobserved. And with the species about to be listed, it's important that we collect this data because we're learning that not all turtles are the same, and we may not know as much as we think we do. But with our GPS, or now that I've talked about GPS transmitters, I want to talk about our VHF. And unlike GPS, where we can collect all of our data remotely, VHF, we had to be out in the field for 5 weeks every day, which meant learning ranch rules and how to operate all the cattle gates. So this is what a typical day at the pond looked like with the cattle present. When we were really lucky, the bull would make an appearance to remind us who's boss. But the pond itself is amazing and full of life. There are killdeer. We have a lot of large, healthy, red-legged frogs. We've seen about 5 or 6 hatchlings, which never happens. You don't see hatchlings very often. We've watched the aquatic garters eat the newt's tail first, which was interesting. But we have no red-eared sliders and no bullfrogs. But with no prior knowledge, we didn't know what to expect when it came to nesting season. We didn't know where females would nest, or honestly, how many females were going to nest, if any. So we monitored one stock pond for the entire month of June using VHF telemetry. We were typically out in the field from 3 to 8:30 p.m. We had this weird 8:30 p.m. deadline because the campsite we were staying at actually had an entrance curfew, which I never experienced before. But we had 15 transmitters. We were able to reuse some of them, so we tracked 20 turtles, exposed their nests, and collected nest site characteristics. So this map is from the summer of June. So successful nests are in green, failed nests are in red, and then we have a double clutch in blue. So a majority of our turtles nested on the bottom south hill. We did have 5 turtles that nested up creek. Those 5 that nested up creek actually utilized the creek as a path, but only the southwest creek or the creek on the left had water in it. So for our preliminary data, we exposed 20 nests and one was our double clutch. So our first female to nest was also our last female to nest. She nested on June 6th and then again on June 26th. And her 2 nests were less than 2 meters apart, or 6 feet 6 inches, which is great implications of nest site fidelity and philopatry. And then for our nest site characteristics, our average distance to the creek was 9.5 meters. We took average distance to the creek for the 5 turtles that nested up creek, since we believe that when the hatchlings emerge, they'll actually utilize the creek, and it's possible that they'll stay in the creek because it can serve as great microhabitat before traveling back down to the pond. Our average distance to nearest tree canopy was 17.8. Our average percent ground vegetation was 92.4%. They nested in a variety of grasses and thistle. And then our aspect was north facing. So these nest site characteristics were pretty standard, which is great. But just like male ABJ, the story doesn't end here. We then took average distance to the pond, which was 47.7 meters. Our furthest nest was over 153 meters away. And when you compare this to literature in California, this is a little bit on the high side. Our average height of grass was 79.2 centimeters. One nest had over 121 centimeters of grass. And this is extremely high, when you compare it to other literature. And then lastly, our average slope was 46.3%. And if you see the pattern here, this is extremely high when you compare it to other literature. There's a study that says that they actually prefer a slope of less than 15 degrees. So just like what we're seeing with GPS data, what we're seeing at this field site is not what we're reading in the literature. So I think it's important to note that there is limited published research, especially on nesting behavior and nest site characteristics. And these turtles, with their plasticity and ability to occupy varying habitats and microhabitats, it can lead to varying behavior. And so it can be difficult to generalize their habitat use. So it's important that we keep studying these small fragmented populations so we learn more about them and their needs. This is that South Hill. On the left is a female in the Southwest Creek before she goes uphill to nest. On the right is another nest marked by this blue flag, and then the creek bed on the left that she walked up. And while we were out in the field for a while, we were able to collect important observations. So typically, the western pond turtles left between 3:45 and 6:30 p.m. to nest. This depended on the temperature of the day. So on hotter days, they emerged later. On cooler days, they emerged earlier. We found 65% failed at their first attempt at nesting, and this is due to the compaction of the soil and how hard the ground is. There were some that would dig for 4 hours and only dig a 2x2 inch cavity. And it was even hard for us to hammer in nails for the exclosures. We found that most western pond turtles buried themselves beneath the grass or dirt while actively nesting. This actually made me super nervous while tracking them. I was afraid I was actually gonna step on them or disturb them. I remember one time I was convinced that I lost a transmitter and it fell off. And I remember seeing the tip of the transmitter sticking out of the dirt, and I go to pull it and I was met with resistance. And I pushed back all of this dirt and she was buried beneath the dirt nesting. 15 out of the 20 western pond turtles stayed on the nest overnight. This created a lot of questions. We're not sure if they continue nesting in the night or if they stop and resume in the morning. We also don't know when they go back to the pond, if they go back as soon as it's light out or if they wait to warm up. But none of the nests were depredated, which is extremely rare, especially since 15 out of the 20 weren't exclosed until later the next day in the afternoon. We have a running theory for this, and that due to the mixture of the soil, that it's possible that there's so much cow urine and feces in the soil that when the turtles release their bladder, it still smells more like cattle than it smells like turtle, so it's not really alerting to the predators. We don't really know how to prove this yet. And then lastly, most nests were improperly covered and had little to no plugs, leaving the top eggs exposed. So when western pond turtles nest, they create a muddy seal that seals off the cavity and protects the eggs. And a lot of these nests were missing that, which is abnormal and alarming. And we're not sure if it's because they run out of energy while nesting and they can't complete it, or because the soil's so compact that they use up their entire bladder at the beginning and that there's nothing to form the plug at the end. So on the left is a female nesting. You can kind of see her transmitter and then a little bit of her shell. But on the right is typically what we were dealing with, and in between those two blue flags is a female nesting, and you'd actually have to peel back all of those layers of grass in order to find her. This is an example of a failed nest. These are two separate nests, both missing the plug, so those top two eggs are circled in red. We're not sure how this is going to impact individual nest success or how the temperatures of the nests are going to vary and how that's going to impact their recruitment. But all of this to say is that it's important that we continue new and prevalent research to better understand these species, and then we can use this data to deploy effective management practices such as larger buffer zones, better soil management, or regulation and restoration of pond ecosystems and riparian habitat. And with our first field season, we learned a lot, but also left a lot more questions than answers. So we have a lot of future research goals that we hope to accomplish later down the line. So we want to conduct a soil analysis. I think it's really important that we understand the soil compaction, the soil moisture, and the soil type, so we can better understand what this habitat is like for them and if there's anything we can do to help. We're curious about the nest site cavities, and if at this field site, if they're smaller than other field sites, and if females that are larger are actually able to dig deeper nests. We've discussed with Oakland Zoo doing a head starting program. We want to put in temperature loggers and figure out individual nest success and sex ratios, especially since this field site is so different. Next summer and spring, we're going to set up camera traps so we can figure out when the females actually go back to the pond and then to see when the hatchlings emerge. And then lastly, I'm curious about our emergence temperatures. So we know that females emerge later when it's hot and they emerge earlier when it's cold. So I'm curious how temperatures impact their physiology while they're nesting. But we could not do any of this amazing work, of course, without any of our amazing collaborators. So I just want to give a big thank you to everybody, and hopefully I can answer any questions.
Were you able to establish any correlation around grazing practices and nesting success, and how to advise ranchers and other areas nearby how to manage their landscape?
We haven't gotten to that point yet. We're waiting into the spring to see how, honestly, the nests are, we're waiting to see when the hatchlings emerge and how cattle presence impacts the success of them hatching. So we know already that it's difficult for them to dig nests, but we also don't know with the cattle always being at the field site if that impacts, like if the eggs are still intact or not. But there's still things that we're discussing when it comes to grazing practices. But we want to look into like trampling first a little bit too, because that will also depend on it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Do you actually know that predators find turtle nests by smelling turtle urine?
Yeah, it's like an olfactory cue. There's actually a study in the South where They put wolf urine on sea turtle nests, and it actually prevented coyotes from depredating the nests.
How long can a western pond turtle stay out of the water?
Probably a couple days, and they'll be okay.